Hello everyone. Today's case is a viewer request, and it's yet another video of a young man vanishing in the middle of the night after drinking. And as all of these have gone, it's been years and the family still has no answers. But this case is a little different in my opinion because the distance between the party and where this young man had to walk home is a lot smaller than the other distances that we've been talking about in these cases. So it really begs the question, how could he have disappeared essentially into thin air on such a short walk home? But before we get there, let's start at the beginning. 20-year-old Ryan Shtuka was born to his mother Heather and father Scott on March 17th of 1997, and he would go on to have two younger sisters. He grew up in Beaumont, Alberta, which is the area just south of Edmonton. He played rugby, hunted with his father, and he was extremely close with his dog Oscar. In the winter of 2017, Ryan got the idea that he wanted to spend the season working at a resort with his best friend. Ryan would be working as a lift operator at a resort called Sun Peaks, which was located in British Columbia. Sun Peaks is a ski resort town located in between Mount Morrissey and Mount Todd that's about a 45-minute drive northeast of Kamloops, British Columbia. And with the beautiful mountain scenery, it's definitely an interesting backdrop to this mystery. When Ryan brought up this idea of going up there to work at the ski resort, his parents were very encouraging. They thought it was a great idea for him to try something new, and since he was only going to be up there for a few months, they thought this was going to be a really great experience for him. His father Scott saying, and I quote, "I was excited for him. I was like, yeah, absolutely. You're young right now. You're only young once. Have some fun." And we knew he was only going to be gone for a few months since the season only lasts for so long. I said, if you don't like it, as always, you can come home. End quote. So on December 1st of 2017, Ryan packed his bags and headed to work in British Columbia for the winter season. While at Sun Peaks, Scott was constantly texting his son. Ryan seemed to be very much so in contact with his family. He was very close to his family, and his father would ask him how things were going up there, and Ryan would tell his dad that he was having a really good time. When Christmas rolled around, his family tried to convince him to come home for the holidays. However, Ryan decided that he wanted to stay in Sun Peaks with his buddies. This would be the first Christmas that Ryan would spend away from his family, which, as I said, they were all very close. They had spent the last 20 years having Christmases together, so it was a little bit different not having Ryan home. But they still were very encouraging of him going up there, trying something new, experiencing some new experiences since he was only 20 years old. He was young. And eventually you have to let your kids go out and experience the world. He was an adult now, and this seemed like it was going to be something very positive. You know, he'd gone there with one of his good buddies. He was making different friends there overall, and a few months in, it seemed like everything was going great. However, February 17th of 2018 would be the last day that Ryan would ever be seen again. Earlier that day, which was February 16th, Ryan would wake up and go to work, and after he'd get off, he'd go home to the residence he shared with his roommates on Sun Peaks Road. Later in the evening, the group would head over to a bar on the resort called Bottom's Bar and Grill for a silent disco event. This is a photo of Ryan that was taken at that bar that night, and as you can see, he looks happy. He looks like he's having fun with his buddies and having some drinks. Also remember that the legal drinking age in Canada is 19, so he was legally drinking. After the bar, the group ended up moving to a house party located on Burfield Drive, which is on the southwest side of the community in a small suburb type area. Now, the details of what happened at that party and what was going on at that party are very limited. All we do know, though, is that later on in the night, one of Ryan's friends decided that he was getting tired and he wanted to go home. So this roommate ended up leaving the party and walking the short distance back to the home they shared at 1160 Sun Peak Road, which now on Google Maps is a cannabis shop. It seems like this company ended up buying this house a couple years after Ryan disappeared, but at the time, this was the house that Ryan and his roommates were renting. And this home is only approximately a 10-minute walk from the party, as you can see here on Google Maps. If they ended up going east on Burfield Drive around to Sun Peaks Road, and then they could go across to their home. There's also an alternate route where they could have walked west on Burfield Drive and then north on a trail called Back in Time, which would lead them to Sun Peaks Road as well, and then to their home. This route would have taken about an 11-minute walk. However, I did see noted that it was very snowy at that time. There was a lot of snow on the ground. I mean, we're talking British Columbia in February. There's going to be a lot of snow. And from what locals have said, plow drivers would come through and all of the snow would be piled on the sides of the road, so people would usually walk down certain paths, and usually it would be main streets to get places. So I'm not sure if this path was actually being used at that time because of the snow, if it was even cleared, but I think it's interesting to note that there is two different routes that could be taken, but both of them were very short. And as you can see from the map here, the party was essentially right behind where this home was that they were renting. It was very close by. And in all of the other cases that we've talked about where young men go missing after drinking or being at a party or a bar or something, the distance they have to get home after is usually very far. However, what makes this case different is that it was a very short walk. So at this point, one roommate has left the party. A short time later, a second roommate decided that he also wanted to leave the party and go back home. And from what has been recounted, it seems like this roommate witnessed Ryan standing up as if he was going to go put his jacket on and get his shoes on and leave behind him. So this roommate ended up leaving as well, expecting Ryan only to be, a minute or so behind him. This happened around 2:10 a.m. So the last time Ryan was seen by his roommates was around 2:10 a.m. And I want to guess that Ryan did leave that party very shortly after that roommate, because I haven't seen any other reports of witnesses stating that Ryan stayed at that party longer or that he left and came back or anything like that. I haven't seen any other statements from any other partygoers in general. However, when Ryan's roommates arrived home, Ryan never showed up after them. But this wasn't extremely alarming at first because it seemed very common that, maybe Ryan had decided to stay at the party longer, or maybe he ended up going to hook up with a girl somewhere, or maybe he decided to go over to another buddy's house. Maybe he crashed at a couch at that party or another person's house. There seemed to be a lot of different possibilities. So there wasn't really many red flags at that moment. On top of that, especially if these roommates were intoxicated, everyone was intoxicated in general, or had some kind of alcohol in their system, you're not going to be expecting the worst case scenario right away. However, when Ryan didn't show up to work the next day, that is when people began to worry, but again, it wasn't like they were calling 911 right away. There seemed to again be some assumptions made that possibly maybe he had a hangover, maybe he had gotten sick and just not shown up. However, in hindsight, when you do look at that, it was extremely out of character for Ryan not to show up to work without telling anyone. He was a responsible young adult. However, when the day went on, Ryan wasn't answering his phone, he wasn't active on social media or answering anyone on social media, and no one had seen him since the middle of the night when he was supposed to be leaving that party. That is when all the alarm bells began to ring, and that is when his roommates began to worry. The local hospital was called to see if Ryan had maybe somehow gotten injured or something happened and he ended up at the hospital. However, he wasn't there. It wouldn't be until 8:47 p.m. that night when the Kamloops RCMP would be contacted regarding Ryan being missing, nearly 19 hours after he had last been seen at that party. Hearing all of the bad signs that something may have been wrong here, especially a young man disappearing in the middle of the night, it was very snowy, it was very cold. The RCMP launched immediately, which is great because we hear so many cases where the police don't take the person being missing seriously right away. But in this case, it seems like the police were concerned considering all of the circumstances, and they actually even launched their police dog services to hopefully help track where Ryan may have gone. Ryan's parents would also receive a message from one of his roommates that night, which read, and I quote, "Hey Heather, hate to text you like this. Haven't seen Ryan since last night and started getting worried about him. We ended up filing a police report, so I wouldn't be surprised if the police give you a call as well. Just thought I'd let you know." End quote. Ryan's parents would end up being called around 10 p.m. that night to be notified of his disappearance. But they were a 9-hour drive away in a different province. And right away, when they heard the information that Ryan hadn't showed up to work, they had a really bad feeling because, as I said, that was very out of character for Ryan. Scott immediately had a bad feeling and told Heather that they needed to get their bags packed and they needed to get to the resort. So Ryan's parents did just that. They packed their bags, they got in their vehicle, and they drove the 9 hours straight to Sun Peaks, wondering the entire way if they were going to arrive there just for the police to tell them that their son was dead. But that's definitely not what happened because it's been 7 years now and there are still no answers. The RCMP began by interviewing the people who had been at that party on Burfield Drive, trying to figure out if Ryan had mentioned anyone, if he was going somewhere after the party, or what his plans were for the rest of the night. The initial thought seemed to be that Ryan may have passed out somewhere on his walk back to the house, and then he succumbed to the elements, and because of the snowfall, the snow may have covered his body. So the RCMP launched their scent dogs, trying to see if they could track and find Ryan's body hidden somewhere. It was said that there was about 20 centimeters of snow that night, so the chances of that happening seemed to be very high. However, from everything that I've seen, the scent dogs didn't find anything, and so the RCMP ended up pulling them out, which is something I'm very curious about. I really want to know, how far did these scent dogs track? Where did they stop? Did they stop anywhere, honestly? And from what I've seen, there's also limited information on his cell phone. I was really curious about his cell phone pinging, and when I looked into it, all I truly found was that it possibly might have pinged around the time he left that house in that area, meaning it never pinged after that. So what happened around that time where not only his cell phone stopped pinging in the area, but also there seemed to be no footprints, there was no clothing found of his, nothing of his has ever been found. Again, he wasn't reported missing for a long time after that. No one was looking for him. There was a lot of snowfall overnight and throughout that day, so footprints could have been covered up. His phone pinging is something I'm interested in, but again, this is a small town, so I'm wondering if all the cell phones ping to that same area, so it might not give an exact area or like time frame. I don't know. That's something that's a little confusing about this to me. If you have more information on it, let's chat about it below. Now, if you remember, I just mentioned there was 2 different routes that Ryan could have taken home that night. The one that went around the main roads and then one that went down a small walking trail. But there was also a possible third option, which was more unlikely, but it was still something to look into. And that was the possibility that Ryan could have taken a shortcut through the woods between the party and his home, which would have cut his walk completely in half. As you can see by the photo on the screen, which was taken by a drone during the winter, this is what it would have looked like the night Ryan left that house party. The woods between his home and the party weren't as dense as they are in the summer, and it also looks like there may have been some kind of stream between the party house and Ryan's home that he would have had to cross as well. So if that was the case, Ryan possibly could have gotten wet, fell down in the snow, couldn't get up, or something may have happened like that, and he could have been in that wooded area between those 2 homes. However, that area was searched during the winter and nothing was found, and it was thought if something did happen to him after the snow had melted in the spring, that he would have been found. However, once spring came and all of that snow melted and that area was searched again, Ryan was not there. Nothing of his was found. So that area was also ruled out. Now, I've also seen rumored that it wasn't just alcohol being drank at this party, but also MDMA may have been taken and that Ryan may have participated in that. MDMA is also known as ecstasy sometimes, and it can cause people to hallucinate. It's usually used at raves, parties, stuff like that. I'm not really very knowledgeable on drugs, but from the little that I do know about ecstasy, it seems like it's used to make people feel happy, have a good time. It's like a feel-good drug. It seems more like an upper, if I'm correct, because alcohol is a downer, so it's kind of counteracting each other. But there are also some dangerous side effects of MDMA or ecstasy. It can cause people to overheat. It can cause people to have seizures, brain swelling I've seen. There are a lot of side effects that could happen that could lead to a medical episode, which is why I think initially a lot of people thought maybe Ryan had some kind of adverse side effects if he had taken something like that. And that is why he possibly may have, collapsed, been buried in the snow, something like that had happened. But once the police dogs went through and looked through everything and they couldn't find any sign of Ryan, any scent of him, and then the snow eventually melted in the spring, that is when things started to kind of make people feel more uneasy, like maybe something else may have happened. Because again, the walk home wasn't very far. It was a 10-minute walk. It was all on, kind of more so main roads, unless he had taken that side path, which is more unlikely. So the big question was, where was Ryan? I've also seen theories that Ryan may have left the party to possibly go get pizza afterwards before the pizza shop closed. Because on top of all of this, I've also seen talk that the 2:10 timestamp is inaccurate and that Ryan actually left earlier than that from the party, and the pizza shop closed around 2 a.m. So there's this theory that Ryan possibly had walked over to the pizza shop after. However, the pizza shop was a half an hour walk away from what I see on Google Maps. So he would have had to walk half an hour to the other side of town and then back half an hour. So could that be possible? I guess if that is possible and he did go that way, that just opens up a whole new can of worms, because that means that there wasn't just that little 10-minute time frame, that short distance back to his house. That leads to a whole nother larger area where something could have happened. It just opens up to so many more possibilities then. After the RCMP search teams pulled out, volunteers from all over British Columbia and Alberta came to help the family search. Heather saying, and I quote, "I thought if someone was going to call me about Ryan being away in Sun Peaks, that maybe he wasn't wearing his helmet and went snowboarding and maybe had an accident or hit a bump the wrong way and hurt himself. I never thought that this would be our reality." End quote. Over the years, not only were ground searches conducted, but K9 units were brought out, drones with infrared cameras were used, snowmobiles. The RCMP brought out their Air 4 helicopters, 40 to 60 SAR search and rescue technicians were brought in, along with 70 volunteers. So this was quite a large search. People were looking for Ryan. Despite all of this, no evidence was ever found. Around the 1-year anniversary of Ryan's disappearance, the RCMP spoke to the community about his case, saying that they'd gone through all of the tips that had been submitted up until that point and still no evidence was found either. Everyone was stumped how Ryan could have disappeared off the face of the earth after just walking home from that party, not a very far distance.
This Sunday marks the 1-year anniversary of Ryan Shtuka's disappearance. We've investigated every tip that's come in to its natural conclusion, but it's not the wanted conclusion.
Somebody knows something. Somebody knows something. We need people to come forward, and whatever tips, information, there's a variety of ways that can come through, but we do need you to step up and do what you can to help contribute to this investigation.
You mentioned that police have no evidence to suggest that Ryan left Sun Peaks. Do you guys have any evidence to suggest that he's still there?
No. No evidences have been found.
When it comes to what may have happened to Ryan, since there is essentially no evidence at all, there's no body, no clothing. His cell phone doesn't really seem to give us much information. There was no footprints. There's no people that have had credible sightings that have really come forward. Because of all of this, the theories have kind of ran wild. There's also been some rumors that have come up that seem to kind of more so be true. And there's also some things that are kind of on the edge of, did this happen or did this not? A lot of people in town seem to simply think that maybe Ryan wandered off into the woods and died from the elements. That's always a huge theory in cases like this. But then again, we have to consider Ryan knew the area at this point. He'd been there for a few months at this resort. He should have known the area very well, and he would have known that his home was only a 10-minute walk away. It was very close. Again, as I said, we talk about a lot of these cases where the person had to walk a very far distance home. They're kind of in the middle of nowhere, or they're in an area of the city where they are that they don't know well. That can lead to bad things happening. But there were so many homes in this area that he was in that he had to walk home to. Yet no one spotted him walking home from there. He didn't make it home after leaving just after his roommates, assumedly. From the narrative, it seems like he left just after one of his roommates. So how didn't he make it home? And if he was going to get pizza after, you'd think maybe he would have asked one of his roommates if they wanted pizza too or something. You know what I mean? You think there'd be some kind of narrative to that. But then again, if he did take substances and he wasn't in his right mind, I guess there's also that. But as I said, the theory at first really did seem to be that maybe Ryan wandered off or something medically happened. He was in the snow. When the snow melted, he'd be found. But when the snow melted, Ryan was not there, and no one has found him to this point. And I understand for the first few months, especially even after the snow melted, maybe some way, somehow he wandered even farther away. Something, maybe he had a mental break, something happened like that, wandered into the woods farther. But there are so many hikers in this area. There are so many people going through the woods in this area. Even in the warmer months, there are hundreds and hundreds of photos I've seen online of people even just hiking the mountains all over. You'd think once the snow melted especially that something of Ryan's would have been found, whether that be a piece of clothing, his cell phone, him, something. But it's been 7 years and not one thing has been found. The mayor of Sun Peaks even speculated the same thing in an interview that he did in the documentary. And I'm going to paraphrase here, but he essentially said that even if a wild animal, like a big cat or something, had pulled his body off somewhere in the area, that you'd think that eventually some piece of him would have been found. Some evidence of him. Then we have the theories that we see in many of these cases where maybe he was hit by a drunk driver. Maybe that driver then panicked, took his body into their vehicle and drove off and dumped him somewhere else or got rid of his body. We've seen that same theory brought up in the Zach LaFave case, which I covered after he vanished from leaving a New Year's party in Nova Scotia. We also heard that theory in the Caleb Harris case where he left his little gated community to go stand by the road, it seems like, while waiting for some takeout food he had ordered. And then he just vanished from there. We see that brought up a lot where maybe someone hit the person, panicked, took the body. But as I always say, you think there may be signs of that, especially in this case because the ground was covered in snow. So if he was hit and there was blood, you'd think it would stand out against the snow and be found immediately. You'd think maybe there'd be a piece of a vehicle somewhere that was, broken when he was hit. Maybe skid marks, something like that. But then again, to play devil's advocate, it did snow very heavily that night. So there is a possibility if there was blood or a piece of a car or something, it would have been covered by the snow. And then by the time the snow melted, that could have been washed away. So the evidence wouldn't have been found even in the end, maybe. But hey, because there is no evidence, everything is kind of possible. Another popular theory seems to be that Ryan possibly OD'd at the party and then everyone conspired together to cover up his body, I guess, and hide him somewhere because they didn't want to get in trouble. But then again, you have to consider that is a lot of people to keep the same narrative and the same story, and usually someone eventually slips up. However, the mayor has spoken up and said that there have been overdoses at the resort before. However, all those overdoses were handled properly.
We've had overdoses here, but all have been handled pretty well. Community's set up pretty good for it. The fire department's ready, the first responders are ready, and thank goodness we, to date, have not had any fatalities on the heavy drug side.
But if we do want to play devil's advocate with that and look at the other side of things, I've seen a lot of locals online speaking up about how there's only about 1,000 full-time residents that live in the resort town itself. And they do say that this is a very small town mentality there. Again, with only 1,000 people, you can't do anything without anyone else knowing about it. Like, you can't keep secrets in a small town, However, this person also suggested, because there is so many out-of-towners coming in and out of this area, it is essentially a tourist trap. a lot of people specifically coming from the Kamloops area to ski and snowboard, that if possibly something had happened regarding Ryan in an out-of-towner, they could have possibly taken his body and skipped town immediately. And no one would have essentially really noticed possibly if this was in the middle of the night and this person did just up and leave. Again, it was almost nearly a full day before he was reported missing. So if someone did do something to him and take him somewhere, they had such a huge lead. Now, despite Ryan being missing and there not being that much information on his case, there has been a lot done in the aftermath. A documentary ended up being made on Ryan's disappearance called Peaks and Valleys, The Search for Ryan Shtuka, and it was really heartfelt to see his family and friends speak about him. I definitely recommend giving it a watch. I'll have it down below. And Ryan's disappearance has not only affected his family, but also his really close friends, who seem to be really struggling with the idea that they may never see him again or get answers. His mother, Heather, also went on to write a book about his disappearance called Missing From Me, which I'll also have down below if you want to take an even deeper dive into this case. His family also did something very interesting, where they ended up creating these little plastic green dinosaurs, which they call Shtukasauruses, and they were created because Ryan really loved dinosaurs when he was a little boy. And so this is a project that was created to spread Ryan's story around the world, and these little dinosaurs actually have a QR code attached to them, as well as information about Ryan's disappearance. And these dinosaurs have actually been found all over the world. On top of that, a children's book called The Kindness Quilt was also written, which features Ryan's green dinosaur as the main character and tells a story about the kindness of strangers. On the back of this book, Ryan's case and story is also featured. Despite all of this, Ryan has still not been found. So the big question is, where is Ryan? What happened to him? Why are there so many cases of young men just vanishing in the middle of the night after drinking? It's strange. The more we keep talking about this concept, the more I keep finding, the more you all keep telling me about. And it seems to kind of be a phenomena at this point, especially since none of them are being found. And it's so strange that not one piece of evidence of them is ever found either. Is it truly just a bunch of young men who are under the influence that wander too far in the woods and just their bodies somehow aren't found? Or is something else happening here? I mean, there's always the possibility of a serial killer or something, but the fact that these young men are disappearing from every single different province, state of North America, it's not like this is all happening in one concentrated area. It's so scattered around. It just seems like a big issue that we all just need to keep talking about. And I think if you have any young men in your life, they need to be talked to and just be told, you know, stay in groups. Young women are always told to do that, to always have a buddy system. We learn as children often to have a buddy system when doing things. I remember doing it as a child, especially in school. You always had a buddy you'd go to the bathroom with or something like that. And I feel like young women and women in general always kind of stick by that code more so than men do. Women always have a buddy system. We always stay in groups. We don't let any of our other, friends wander off. But it seems like with men, they don't have that same concept because men are less likely to be the victims of foul play. And the statistics with men being harmed, when going off drunk or something like that are much lower than women. However, there seems to be one too many of these cases piling up. And I think that needs to be a conversation had with young men where we tell them, have a buddy system. No matter how safe you feel, still always be somewhere with someone, especially if you're drinking. Always go home with someone else. Stick with someone else. There needs to be more precautions taken because men are just as vulnerable, it seems. Obviously less vulnerable than women for something bad happening to them in these scenarios. But it still seems to be happening with young men, and that is a problem. And I think things like this could be easily prevented. And same thing with the Riley Strain case, which we've all been talking about. If he had had a friend with him that night, I think it would have been less likely something may have happened. And in all of these cases, if these young men had someone with them, I think something bad most likely wouldn't have happened. So if we can learn anything from these cases, I think it's that. Ryan is described as a white male standing 6 feet tall, weighing 180 pounds with blonde hair and brown eyes. He was last seen wearing dark jeans, a gray and white t-shirt, a blue navy coat, gray Vans shoes, and a burgundy baseball cap, which was logoed for the rugby team he played on and reads Northwestern Athletic Association. This is the last photo we have of Ryan from that party at the local bar, and this was the outfit he was last seen wearing in, apart from that navy jacket. As I said, this case is just very strange because it reflects a lot of these cases we've been talking about, but the time frame and the distance Ryan had to walk home was so much smaller than those cases, which makes this one even stranger. Despite the cold temperatures, Ryan shouldn't have succumbed to hypothermia in that short walk, and he was said to have had a winter jacket on. And despite this being a rural town and a rural area, there were so many houses around in that area that he was walking to, which just makes this even stranger to me. But then on top of that, when it comes to resorts and areas like this that have a big business venture, it makes me extremely wary of cover-up in general, or at least some resistance in the person's story being put out, because again, Resorts and stuff like this, tourist traps, the last thing that these places want is negative press, and for people to be scared to go to that area because someone has gone missing, the possibility of kidnappers or serial killers or murderers in that area. It may deter people from going there, and then the resort loses revenue. However, in this case, things seem to be different because the mayor has spoken up on this. They seem to allow the family to search as much as they want in those areas. They also allow the family to host events there, remembering Ryan, so the idea of maybe a cover-up happening is less likely in my opinion, but I guess it's always something to consider because it really doesn't seem like they're trying to hide the fact that he went missing there, which we've seen happen in other cases before, but in this case, it doesn't seem to be the issue. But because of that, this case even stumps me more so. But if you have any information on Ryan's disappearance, please say something. I'll have the appropriate authorities linked down below. My heart goes out to Ryan's family, and I truly hope they can eventually get answers. They are extremely strong, and they continue to fight for Ryan. So if you guys want to go show them love on their Facebook page or anywhere else in the comment section down below as well, please do so. And as always, I hope you all stay safe out there. Lock your windows and doors. If you're going somewhere, especially at night where you're going to be drinking or using substances, please use a buddy system and be safe, because I would love to see you in the next video.